What's up, heathens? How ya doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and normally I'm critically analyzing apologists' claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. But tonight we are going to be discussing religious trauma with an actual professional counselor, Janice Selbie. Am I saying your name right?
You sure
Sorry.
are. It's
All right.
history.
From the Divorcing Religion, that's the podcast, and then you have your conference on religious trauma that you also do, right?
That's exactly right. Yes, and I'm joining you from British Columbia. And when I do the conference on religious trauma, it's all online. We just finished. We had one in October. It was phenomenal.
Oh, nice. I guess I didn't see where y'all were having it, but I'll definitely have to try to attend this coming year. So that's awesome to hear. Now, do you want to tell everybody kind of who you are, what you do? I know I've mentioned that you're a professional counselor, but maybe you can elaborate on exactly what you're doing right now.
Sure. Yes. So I had grown up very Pentecostal, and it was normal in my house for my parents to speak in tongues and anoint my head with oil when I was sick. These things were just a normal part of growing up in a Pentecostal home. Then I married a man that my pastor set me up with. I, I see Godless Mom. Hello, Godless Mom. Uh, and this man that I married wanted to become a minister, so we went to a very conservative Bible college, and then I became a real fundamentalist. I wore a head covering, very Mennonite. Went to church with no instruments. Men sat on one side, women on the other. And did that for a few years and really tried to live as holy a life as I could. And still, all these terrible things kept happening. Just calamity after calamity seemed to befall our poor family. And then finally, our youngest daughter was stricken with a life threatening illness. And I thought, that is it. That is it. No one has tried harder than me to please God and live according to the Bible. And I must have bet on the wrong horse. Like, if God's somewhere, he's not here in the Bible. So started to give myself permission to explore. Ended up divorcing religion, divorcing my husband, going back to school. And that's when I started learning all about trauma and my own trauma. I became a registered professional counselor, started specializing in religious trauma. And now I run the Conference on Religious Trauma, the Divorcing Religion podcast, and the Shameless Sexuality Life After Purity Culture conference, too. So I'm a busy gal.
Yeah, it sounds pretty busy, but it all sounds very interesting, and I'm so glad that you're, putting all this work in to raising awareness about religious trauma. That's one of the things that a lot of very combative religious people, they often mock the idea of like people having religious trauma, or like what they think. Well, what kind of you know. What kind of things can you suffer from with religion? So I guess my first question is what are some common challenges that individuals face when dealing with religious trauma? And maybe you can further explain like what religious trauma is.
Sure. So I think first off, I would tell folks that trauma is subjective. And so that's why, if we're just talking about like regular old trauma, like say maybe two people are walking down the street and they see a horrifying car wreck, and one of them is utterly, sidelined by the whole thing. And the other one's like, well, that's terrible, and goes off to work and they're fine. So it has to do whether whether it affects us as a traumatizing experience has to do with some of the things like coping mechanisms that we already have in place, or what other things we're already dealing with in our life. So when we're looking at religious trauma or religious trauma syndrome, it's a collection of things that we can suffer from when we're in an insular group, a high demand group. Like, I have losses when I'm inside religion because I can only be friends with certain people. I'm not allowed to explore my sexuality, whatever the rules are that my group has. So those are losses I suffer within the group. And then when I leave the group, I have loss on top of those losses as well, because now I've lost my identity, my community, my worldview, plunged often into existential crisis, which was the case for me. And people don't get it if they haven't experienced it. You can even be reaching out to counselors, going to therapists. If they have not experienced being inside an insular group and having that indoctrination, especially from childhood, but also if people join later in life, the indoctrination is severe and can get us all tangled up. And we need to talk to people who can understand that as we make our way out.
Yeah, yeah, I had a little bit of that myself coming out of religion, because I had a pretty close knit group of friends growing up, and then once my worldview changed to being more secular, more atheistic, I eventually had to distance myself from those people. So I was kind of left, sort of alone in that respect, not really having a lot of personal connections with people around me. So I definitely feel that that is part of my own personal history. Now I'm wondering if you can kind of maybe tell us how to navigate the journey toward recovery while building some kind of resilience against lingering effects of any past indoctrination, because I know a lot of people that watch my content, they come from heavily indoctrinated backgrounds. One of my good friends on here, Andrew, he came out of Mormonism, and it was a pretty heavily indoctrinating kind of experience for him. And so he's, I don't know how he's handled it personally, but I could tell that he was kind of on a journey of recovery and all that.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's not easy to come out of Mormonism. Really, any fundamentalist background, and I've worked with people who've left evangelical Christianity, former Orthodox Jews, people who've left Islam, former Jehovah's Witnesses, former Catholics. It really seems to be that fundamentalist piece that can make things extra hard. So did you take the Bible? Did you interpret it to be literal? Did you believe, were you taught to believe that there was a God who interacted with you every day, that Jesus was your best friend, or any of those things? So when we lose that, whether we just determine it's not true and we reject it, or whether we suddenly feel abandoned by our faith. I never thought I'd be without my faith. I was a very devout believer. Um, I think we go through a significant grieving process, and a lot of the work that I do with folks recovering from religious trauma is exploring some of that grief. We can't mourn what we don't acknowledge. And so we need to acknowledge there have been some significant losses there. And there are types of grief that specifically impact us when we lose our faith. Things like ambiguous loss. There's no body to bury. So how do you gain closure for something like that? Or disenfranchised grief. So we're grieving about something the rest of the world just doesn't understand. I still had to get up and go to work every day, even though it felt like the most important part of my life, felt like my entire core dropped out of my being. I was adrift on an ocean. That's what it felt like, trying to figure out what's true, what's not true. Did my parents lie to me? Who can I trust? Can I trust myself if I believe this thing that then turns out not to be true? So we're really going through a grieving process. So psychoeducation is a big piece, teaching people about grief and loss and what that might look like, how they might be feeling in their body. We're often talking about almost a complex form of PTSD, because we had the religion every day. There was prayer every day. There was Bible reading every day. There was church every week. It was over and over again, often being told, you're not enough. You'll never be enough. You're nothing without Jesus. So the indoctrination was just pounded into us over and over again. That's what makes it complex. That's why it can be so hard to shake some of these things. So understanding and learning about grief, doing the educational and research component, also reaching out to connect with others who understand. group work can be very helpful. It's so validating when another person does just what you're doing, even just nodding their head like, yeah, I get it. I understand your pain, your loss. I've had pain and loss too. And it's just the person is willing, the people are willing to kind of sit with you in that hole that you're in. That can be really helpful on the healing journey. And recognizing that it takes time. I wish we could just flip a switch and everything would be okay. But it's not like that. Grief takes time and it can be sticky and messy and complicated, especially when we have family members who still believe. Maybe we're still married to a believer. That's a big issue that can come up. So, yeah, there are lots of factors, but things we can do for building our own resilience. I think the main one is self-compassion and reframing things. So we've had, it's almost like these goggles have been glued to our face and we're going to see the whole world that way. We're going to interpret everything in light of scripture and indoctrination. So being able to remove those and start experiencing the world and seeing it for ourselves, that goes a long way too. And again, that is something that takes time because it's hard to let go of some of those teachings.
Yeah. So if somebody is coming out of religion and they're having a bit of a difficult time, would it be good advice for them to find like a local group where they can interact with people of, similar worldviews and everything like that?
Yep. And I can, there's one that I recommend, Recovering from Religion. So people can just Google that, Recovering from Religion. I think it's .org. Journeyfree.org also, another very well-known group. So these are organizations started by pioneers in the religious trauma field. Dr. Darrell Ray started Recovering from Religion. Dr. Marlene Winnell, who coined the phrase religious trauma syndrome. Dr. Winnell started the Journey Free organization and group. So those are two excellent groups I can recommend to people right off the bat. Of course, people can go to divorcing-religion.com. That's my website. I also run support groups and work one-on-one with clients. So I think an important thing is that people are looking for secular therapists. I don't want people going to church saying they're struggling with religious trauma, because we don't want to go back to what's caused the trauma. So secular therapy is a good place to look up. I think it's seculartherapy.org, and it has lists of secular therapists all across the United States and Canada. Very helpful place.
Oh yeah, Darrell Ray is a good friend of mine. I've done events with him, and I've been meaning to get him on my channel to talk about some of the work that he does with recovering from religion and specifically his specialty area. So,
Excellent.
yeah. I will say for anybody that's watching, if you have specific questions, this is the one time, or not the one time, but this is the first time we've got a professional counselor on GE. So if you have any questions and you definitely want them to be answered, you can send in a super chat and we'll interact with those. We'll also try to pull some non-super chat questions at the very end to deal with those as well. So, talking about, coming out as a non-believer and stuff like that. How can someone approach coming out as a non-believer to their family, friends, other people that they hold close to them in their daily lives, in a way that minimizes the conflict that usually comes with it, but also maintains your own personal integrity?
Yeah, the coming out process is very big. And again, someone who hasn't lived it, had this massive paradigm shift in their life, might not even understand the need. Well, why do you have to say anything at all? But we really have this tug of war going on between acceptance, desperately wanting to be accepted by the people we love and admire, and our other need for authenticity. We want to be seen and known for who we are. And so those things are kind of having a tug of war for a while. So maybe People just decide they're going to play it cool. They're not going to tell anyone that they don't believe anymore. And that's a choice that some people make. Maybe someone's a priest or a pastor, and they still feel like they have to get up every Sunday and speak to their congregation because they have to bring a paycheck home for their family. So that's a difficult position to be in. Or sometimes it's not safe for people to come out and reveal that they no longer believe. So that is something I encourage people. Are you beholden to your parents somehow? Are you living with them? Do you depend on them and they're really staunch believers? You need to be careful. Do you have some money set aside in the bank? Do you have a place that you could stay if everything goes sideways and you're kicked out of the house? So these are things that people actually need to consider before they decide, yes, I am going to come out because I don't like living in a way that feels inauthentic to me. And then we look at things like, well, okay, what's your reasoning? What's your motivation or your end goal? What do you hope? What's the best case scenario that could happen? What's the worst case scenario? We want to be prepared for the worst. And perhaps things like don't take them to a restaurant or a public space to tell them. You're hoping it will minimize them getting upset, but think how you would feel if you received the worst possible news, because to believers, there's no worse news than to learn that someone has rejected their faith. It's akin to hearing that someone has died. It's similar to that. So, let's be careful and mindful. We also want to give people time to digest what we've said. It's big news. Some people prefer to write a letter or send an email. They might send it out to the whole family. I always encourage people, if you want to send a letter, you're going to write it and then you're going to sit on it for a few days. You're going to keep going back to it, keep looking at it, because it might just be very intense and emotional, that first draft. So we want to be really thoughtful about how we do things, and just letting the other people know our love for them has not changed. They're still our mom. They're still our whoever they are to us, and we still love them. The only thing that has changed is that we just no longer hold this same belief. And so then we need to switch our focus to shared values. We don't share the belief anymore, but we still may share many of the same values: kindness, generosity, respect, humility, whatever, all those things. So those are all some things people can keep in mind if they're looking at coming out to loved ones.
Yeah. Just thinking off the top of my head here, what kind of advice would you give to somebody who has come out to their parents or their loved ones, and their loved ones have like rejected them, and it's like they're your immediate family, like you're not dependent upon them or anything like that, but it's still like, your immediate family. It's like all of a sudden, like a light switch, your parents just don't want to see you anymore. I know Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, they often deal with these kinds of things.
Oh, it's just terrible. And it's a form of shunning that you're talking about, and it's deadly. It's just a terrible, terrible thing. And I think it's extra important then for people to be reaching out and looking for community. There are communities for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-Mormons. In fact, the time to be reaching out to those communities is maybe before you even tell your immediate family, because you're going to want to have some supports in place. And I've worked with clients who've come out of such insular groups, like maybe a homeschool family and there were 12 kids or something, and the kids didn't receive an adequate education, and then if they're kicked out when they're 16, what do? Sometimes they don't even have a birth certificate. Like I've heard some wild stories. And so that's why actually I'm working on another project that I hadn't even mentioned to you, but I'm interested in what it would take to establish recovery centers around the United States and really around the world for people who have left insular, high demand religious and spiritual groups, because they need a place, a soft place to land to help them get back on their feet. So, yeah. And as kind and compassionate as we can be to anybody who comes to us, telling us about those things, not saying, well, why'd you stay so long? And how could you be so stupid? But instead just listening and caring, because they have just suffered a tremendous loss.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people, they get wrapped up in their own, I guess, mindset when it comes to these things, and they don't think about what that person has been through.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, what my next topic? Don't mean to switch so quickly here, but what strategies can non-believers use to maintain a respectful and loving relationship with their family members who are devout believers? Like, I know, just given my own experience, I'll lead off with that. My dad's family is heavily religious. They're very Catholic, but they're very reasonable in that they have agreed that just we don't talk about religion. Like, religion's off the table. We don't, like, they don't ever try to push me in one direction or another. They just love having my company, and so that's kind of one way that we have done that. But I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on if there are multiple strategies or what.
Yeah, I'm so happy for you that you have that experience where the religious side of the family has chosen relationship with you over religion. And this is where we run into trouble, when people choose religion over relationship. So, something that's important, which is typically completely grossly neglected, overlooked, and trampled on in religious families, is the idea of boundaries. We are not encouraged, and in fact, we're actively discouraged from having personal boundaries when we grow up in fundamentalist homes and fundamentalist groups. It's like a cult of confession. So you're supposed to hold every thought captive, and then go confess it or tell someone, or you're not allowed to do this, not allowed to think about that. So that breeds a type of codependency, and it's really unhealthy. And so a big thing we need to learn about is setting boundaries. And first, we have to develop enough self-esteem that we think we are worth having a boundary. It's okay for us to set a boundary and then to enforce the boundary. So I'll speak from my own experience. My dad is a narcissist and a fundamentalist, so that's quite a combination. And when I told him that I didn't believe anymore, um, he was very shocked. He cried. He was emotional. And then when we would be out somewhere, if we were going to have a meal, he would make an extra big show of standing up and praying or whatever it was. And so I said to him, no, if you do that again, I'm leaving. I'm not going to put up with that kind of stuff. He did it again. I got up and left. And so then, okay, he didn't do that again. But he did come over for dinner one time and started at the table saying to my teenage daughters, how's your relationship with Jesus? And he knew, absolutely knew this wasn't acceptable. And I just had it. I'm afraid I wasn't very calm in the moment either. I could have been a lot calmer, but I gave him two choices. You either stop this right now, or you can go home. And so that's what it can look like, setting and enforcing boundaries. It is very hard to do, but people don't respond until we do start enforcing those boundaries. So, and a boundary can be flexible. Sometimes if people are used to being one way, it might take them a little while to get used to your boundary. So you get to decide how firm it's going to be and what the consequences. My mom is still a believer. I don't talk to my dad. We're estranged, but my mom is still a believer. And we do like your family does. There's so many other things for us to talk about. We're just happy to sit with each other and be together. We don't have to talk about religion. So that's my hope for people. That's the gentlest way, if they can come to that agreement that they're just not going to talk about it Otherwise, they can focus on the shared values, like we were discussing a little bit earlier. They can talk about sports, talk about the kids, those sorts of things.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if you know this, but I'm from I guess you would call the deep South. I'm from North Alabama, here in the States. But I know one thing baked into the culture down here is this idea of, respecting your parents all the time, basically. And I find that that's a little counterintuitive, because a lot of people think that that means that you just, you can't set boundaries like that with your parents. Like, I know for me, at least, the way that it was taught to me is just that, I have to respect my parents. So if they start doing something or they say something, like, I can't say anything back to them. So that's been one particular hurdle. It's been difficult for me to get past. And I still struggle with it on occasion.
Yeah, I totally get that. And that is something that's really pushed again and again. Children, obey your parents and honor your parents and respect them. Frankly, some parents do not deserve to be honored or respected. If they are abusive, if they are toxic, we are allowed to set boundaries. We must first and foremost protect ourselves and protect our mental health. If we have children, we have to be protecting our children as well, and their mental health, from parents and grandparents who would be telling them they're going to go to hell, or just, going off about demons or these sorts of things. So we do sometimes really have to step up, even in uncomfortable situations. We also, I talked about writing a letter earlier, or just when we're talking with our parents, we can say, you've raised me to respect you, and you've raised me to respect myself as well. And so part of respecting myself is that I won't be party to this, or, I disagree with this thing that you're saying. I haven't seen it that way. We can be curious. Curiosity goes a long way, rather than judging people. Just to be warmly curious, wow, I never thought of it that way. Or, gee, Dad, when did you start thinking that? Or what influenced you to think that way? And just really be curious about it. Sometimes we have to say what we think about it, and sometimes we don't. But it's always an opportunity to get to know somebody better. And this, when people are still in a cult or a high demand group, and we wish they would get out, it doesn't help to say to them, you're in a cult, you're brainwashed, all these things. That those are not helpful. Those close people up. But what opens people up is when we say, please tell me more. I'd like to know more. And then you take it from there. Doesn't mean you have to agree with what they're saying, but you want to know what's driving them. And we can even remind them of things that we've done outside religion. Remember when we stayed in the cabin and we had such a good time? Or remember that Christmas we had when we were kids? Just reminding them there are things that you can do together and you have enjoyed that don't have anything to do with their cult or religion or high demand group.
Yeah. And this is just coming to mind, but I had this conversation recently with a religious person who was trying to figure out why I didn't believe. And, they asked me to, about the 10 Commandments and everything. And so I just posed this really simple question to them. And it's along the lines of, talking about respecting your parents and all this stuff. But I basically said, if a parent is like molesting and raping their child, should that child still respect their parents?
Mm-hmm.
And they came back with, it's hard to say this, but yes, they should definitely still respect their parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of wondering, from, a religious trauma, counselor position, what would your response be to that? Or what do you think about that response from this particular individual?
Yeah, I find it deeply concerning and disturbing, and it speaks to the depth of their own indoctrination, where they are, instead of allowing their conscience to dictate how they would treat another person, they've totally given it over to what this book says. This book is the only book that matters. There's no other book. And I'm speaking of the Bible, of course. There's no other book that matters more than this. And so I mean, that's concerning. Do we want people with views like that to be in positions of authority? Do we want them to be uh, police officers and lawyers and judges and politicians making rules and setting punishments for other people? It's very unhealthy. I would always direct people in the direction of humanism. We want to do what's best for people. We want to be elevating people, not. That's just horrible, even to think about that. That they would think it's acceptable ever to harm a child.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I feel like it's I've noticed that there's like this vicious cycle in a lot of religious communities, not all religious communities, but in some religious communities out there that are kind of based on this whole idea of like, well, you got to give respect, or they hold certain people in high regard, and so like they, for whatever reason, leave it up to God, or they say, oh, well, God will judge them in the end, or something like that. And I feel like that really promotes an environment where offenders can continue to offend
Oh yeah.
their victims.
Yeah, the word that immediately leaps to my mind in glaring, flashing letters is predator. That welcome predators, you're welcome here. And this also makes me think about another topic that I often end up speaking with my clients about, the concept of forgiveness. And I consider forgiveness to be the F word because it has been so hijacked by religion and because it's been weaponized by abusers. This whole idea of you have to forgive, you must forgive me. And I just don't buy it. What I work with my clients on instead is getting to a point of acceptance, radical acceptance of this is what happened. This thing happened to me or was done to me, or perhaps I did this thing. I can't go backwards. I can only go forward. Now, what is my choice in this moment? Seeing things exactly as they are. Maybe this person has done this to me several times. Well, so my choice then might be, I'm not going to interact with that person again. I do not agree to give them the opportunity to harm me again. There's no forgiveness that's required there. It's acceptance of what has happened. That's where the power lies. It's your wound, your choice, your power. If you feel like you want to do a real big forgiveness thing with them, go ahead. But don't ever accept this pressure that you must forgive. And for those of us who grew up in Christianity, we put the pressure on ourselves. We do such a good job. We don't even need anyone else. And we're like, why can't I forgive that person? Why can't I? Well, they violated a boundary. So you're probably angry because they violated a boundary. And anger is important because it lets us know something is wrong. Someone violated our boundary at some point. And no, you don't have to forgive.
I've often heard that forgiveness is more for the victim than it is for the perpetrator. But I've always seen, I guess, in my own view, I've always seen forgiveness as being like, I guess, alleviating, I guess, maybe some of the uh, responsibility or guilt, maybe, of the perpetrator. Like, I don't know, maybe I have a weird concept of what forgiveness actually is, but I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on this idea that for a victim to forgive their
Right.
abuser,
Yeah.
that it's more for the victim than it is the
Wow.
abuser.
I think that is so bass backwards. I really do. I think that's just something that's been promoted and forced on us in society to even insinuate that a person who has been assaulted or had something terrible done to them, now it not only has this terrible thing been done to them, now they have the burden, they have to forgive. I just think that's utter nonsense. I don't go along with that at all. If they want to keep moving forward in their life in a healthy way, of course, they're going to have to process what has happened, and there's grief work involved in that too, and accept. We can't just pretend that never happened. It actually did. happen. And once you can get to that point of, yes, that did happen, then you can start, going on with the rest of your life. And I think of some parents who have lost a child very tragically in childhood, and they're unable to even talk about it, even to admit that it's happened. The bedroom stays exactly the same as it was, like nothing ever changes. And that's when grief can get complicated, when it's going on and lasting a really long time. And grief just takes as long as it takes. But we never want to blame the victim, and we never want to be adding burden to the victim that they need to forgive the perpetrator. It's their choice.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I love how you framed it as, accepting what had happened and, then having the option to forgive if you feel like you can or that you want to. I think that sounds to me like a very empowering thing. And I know that at least the way that it's been portrayed to me is like they seem to substitute forgiveness for the acceptance part. And it's really what you want to do is accept rather than like forgive in that particular instance.
Oh, people get extremely ticked off when they hear me say that I think forgiveness is the F word, and that it's not necessary, that acceptance is what's necessary. But I also think of clients I have who have been completely shunned by their families. So there's that ambiguous loss piece. They haven't buried their family. The family's not dead. The family just literally has cut them off, doesn't want anything to do with them. What happens then? They are never going to receive any kind of apology if the family is shunning them, and they just have to. They have to come to a point of acceptance, and then, even as painful as it is, that's where the clarity comes. That's when we realize, okay, my power is now in this moment. I get to decide what to do with my energy moving forward. And that's part of the grieving process too. It's one of the tasks of mourning. We stop investing energy in the deceased or in our faith or in relationships that are dead. And we start reinvesting that energy somewhere else.
Yeah. To shift topics a little bit here, I wanted to talk about purity culture a little bit, because here in America we're seeing like a lot of concerning things happening. There's the abolishment of abortion, and we have a lot of more fundamentalist Christians that are in our government, and they're pushing really bad ideas. And one bad idea is purity culture. We have that rampant throughout the United States, and it from what I can tell through scientific studies on purity culture and all that, it only does more harm. It does not actually prepare children. Young adults. It doesn't do anything to protect them. But my question for you tonight is, in what ways does purity culture impact individuals, either young adults or later on in life, with adults? And what steps can be taken to recover from the potential harmful effects that it causes?
Right. Oh, this is such a big one, because purity culture indoctrination can be absolutely toxic for people. If it's foisted on us from the time we're children, we can almost feel like we have to be separate from our body. So masturbation is looked on as bad and sinful. And of course, it's something that's just completely natural. Having thoughts, romantic thoughts about other people, also just totally frowned upon. And so boys get in trouble for what they think, but it's the girls, it's their own bodies that cause the trouble, according to purity culture. So this really messes people up. And I have worked with clients in their 40s and 50s who have never had sex with anyone because they grew up inside the church, and they knew they couldn't be with anyone until they were married. And then they just never got married. And so here they are in their 40s and 50s, and they're trying to figure out, they don't know how to date. They don't know how to relate to the people that they're interested in a romantic way. And it can really have, crippling effects on us emotionally and psychologically. So reach out to a qualified secular therapist. There are sex therapists out there. Oh, I wrote a couple of websites down, people that I really respect here. Uh, inbedwithdanielle.com. That's Dr. Danielle Kramer. And she just spoke at the conference on religious trauma, inbedwithdanielle.com. And the other one I really appreciate is purityculturedropout.com. That's my friend Erica Smith, who's a sex educator, purityculturedropout.com. And I love some of the programs that Erica has put together, things like a sexual values workbook, things that people wouldn't even think of. But it's good for us to become aware. We need to give ourselves permission to have pleasure, to experience sexual pleasure. And we start small. It doesn't mean you're right away on, Pornhub or something like that. You're going to start small with yourself, figuring out what feels good, or even just what do you like. Maybe you've been so religious, you've never even had the opportunity to figure out what you actually like. So starting small. Shame is a big piece often when we're working with people recovering from purity culture. And I would like to have people picture in their mind a cartoon, and one person is standing there and the other person comes up with this huge like garbage bag they're trying to hand them, and it says shame, and they're trying to give it to the person, and the person just says no thanks. Just says no thanks, I'm not going to take that, and they just turn and walk away. Shame has been put on us, it's been placed there by someone else. So when we are feeling shame about something, it's good to examine, where did that first come up? Who introduced me to the idea that that was shameful? What was going on in their life? Because it's about them. It doesn't have to be about us.
Yeah, I know. I didn't really deal a lot with purity culture as I was coming up, but it was something that I kind of learned afterwards. But I also grew up Catholic and then Baptist, and so those undertones were always there. And this whole the whole idea that you should be shameful for having just normal, human feelings about either other people or other things of that nature. I think that kind of is for me at least where a lot of the problems kind of started. As far as the effects that religion had on me in this particular area.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm I'm I was trying to think if there's any other questions that I had about purity culture. Was there anything else that maybe you wanted to talk about as far as purity culture goes? I know that this
Sure.
is one of the areas that you really sort of hone in on.
Mhm. Yeah, a
Uh,
couple of years ago or last year, I put together this event called Shameless Sexuality: Life After Purity Culture. And it was an online conference that I put together, had sex therapists and sexologists and social workers and psychologists who all had a lot to say about sex and sexuality, particularly topics that might be of interest to those of us who came out of purity culture. And I'm just now going to be starting to post those on my YouTube channel. So people can Google Conference on Religious Trauma YouTube. I think the YouTube channel is actually called Come to Court, and court is CORT. But so I'll be putting those videos up one by one from the Shameless Sexuality event. I think it's important for people to give themselves permission to experience pleasure, to try out different things. It might be helpful just to even look at sexuality through the ages and ancient religions and fertility rites and those sorts of things, where the feminine form was worshipped. Like, it hasn't always been this shameful thing that Puritan Christianity has really made it out to be. And the more we repress, the more we become obsessed with something. And I think we see a lot of that going on in the United States in particular, where If people aren't allowed to talk about sex and learn about sex, well, they're still going to have sex. Girls are getting pregnant. Teenage, girls and young women are getting pregnant because they haven't learned. And no one abstains. It's very rare for a person to abstain from having sex because biologically, we got the urge to merge. So
Yeah, I know that I've heard now. I've heard conflicting accounts of this, but I've heard that in Mormonism they have some rather awkward ways of getting around the whole no sex thing.
mhm.
I'll quote the great Ian Malcolm in "Life Finds a Way," in that particular topic area. Something that you said earlier made me think of this, and I've seen this multiple times in just news stories that I see. I try to pay attention to a lot of the atheist sort of news sources like Hemet Meta and all that, and people like that. I I and I guess this kind of comes in with religious trauma, but um, I've noticed that there's a lot of pastors out there when they talk about purity and stuff of that nature, um, they'll talk about it as if the burden primarily falls on young women, and they will objectify women in their congregation, and they'll compare a woman who's not a virgin and not married to like a dirty rag or something of that nature,
Mhm.
and then they basically give a pass to the men because it's all the women's fault. And I'm kind of curious, like, what kind of I don't know if you've dealt with any of this like on a professional level, but I'm just kind of curious, like, what kind of traumatic things can this particular ideology, this particular part of the ideology cause for people in the religion, and I guess once they get out of the religion.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a degree of misogyny at play when we're looking at those kind of examples where, I call it hymen worship. It's not just in Christianity, it seems to be in the big three Abrahamic religions for sure, where women really don't amount to much more than baby making machines. And where I think that's does a disservice to everyone because it can have the boys feeling like they maybe have ownership. They get to say, they can make demands on the partner of when to have sex once they're married because they are viewing the woman as property. And for women, it can be very, and girls, it can just be very demeaning. And it really can, our self-esteem can really suffer when we're told that's the most important thing about us. I think of women who've been very faithful and devout Christians who are unable to bear children, and there's a price, there's an emotional cost to that in the church because you're expected to be fruitful and multiply. Or think of there was this teenage girl in the news many years ago, Elizabeth Smart. She was raised in a Mormon family. She was kidnapped by an absolutely deranged man who raped her. And she had just been learning as a young teenage Mormon girl that her value was all tied up in being a virgin. And she struggled with suicidality as a result of that because she thought, oh, this one precious thing that I had has been taken from me. I can never give it to anyone else. And I mean, that girl just had to survive, and she did survive, and she managed to get away, and she's lived a beautiful life since then. But think of how deeply that impacted her to be thinking that one thought. That was just a burden she did not need.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a horrible story. I believe that I was conscious of news when that broke out, but
Mhm.
that was really horrible. And I've never found myself in a position personally where I've ever thankfully I've ever you know been told or been made to, I guess, perceive women in that light. But I know that it's a persistent problem in a lot of religious communities out
Yes.
there.
Yes, and one thing that we all need to learn about, which we're also typically not taught about, and again, this has to do with boundaries, is the idea of consent. What do I give consent to? And so when we are raising children, even if that's what we're doing, we can be teaching our kids from the time they're young about consent. Can I give you a hug? Can I touch your cheek? Teaching them about autonomy. And so that maybe when auntie and uncle so and so come over and they demand a big hug, and our kid is holding back, we can ask them, oh, do you want to give a hug, or do you not feel like giving a hug? So just giving them permission. And so as adults, to learn about consent, one thing I've heard from some of my clients is that they have started engaging in the BDSM community. And of course, in that community, consent is king. You are the one, you have a safe word, and you get to give permission or withhold permission. And so it's not everybody's cup of tea by any stretch, but some folks have found it a really helpful and interesting way to learn about consent.
I never thought about it that way, but that totally makes sense. Yeah, for that community, and I feel like consent is really skewed in religious communities. They often like don't even consider consent. I mean, if you think about it, the holy books, like the holy books of the big three, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, none none of the women in the books are ever considered, like as far as consent goes, like
Oh,
whether or not they consent. And I find that a lot of religious people are in deep denial about the lack of consent that's given to women, or the lack of consideration that's given to women. And it's just staggering for me to hear that, because like when I was growing up, I never thought about it in that way. Like the classical stories that kids are taught about it, like Mary being impregnated by God, and later on in life, it's like, wait a second, he didn't say, "Hey, do you want to do this?" It was, "You're gonna do this," kind of thing. Like she didn't have any kind of consent about it. And so like that was like one of the moments that blew my mind as far as like coming out of a religious mindset. And it just blew my mind. It's like, oh no, there was no consent there. But when I confront believers about it, they're like, oh, she consented. Where?
Yeah. And, another issue related to purity culture and the whole then idea that a male person gets to have ownership over a female person. I just interviewed Dr. DJ Williams, from a professor at the University of Idaho. He's in charge of their social crime classes or something like that. Very smart fellow, specializing in incels. So I'm sure your listeners are aware that an incel is in someone who is not voluntarily celibate. They don't want to be celibate, but no one is willing to have sex with them. That's how they feel. And so they're stuck being in celibate. And he was just talking about how a lot of them are coming from there's purity culture somewhere in the background, whispering to them that they deserve to be having sex, and that it's women are bad for withholding from them. He was fascinating. That was a really interesting interview. And just to think, yep, purity culture has permeated into all sorts of places and spaces.
Yeah, there's I can't remember the website name, but I'm glad I don't. But it was like traditional marriage or biblical marriage or something like that. And the guy regularly makes like the atheist news, at least whenever he puts out a particularly horrible piece. And I remember one was like this whole idea that if you're married, then you can't be raped. And he totally denies this idea of marital rape, which obviously plays into this whole lack of consent thing that is indoctrinated into people, especially when they come from more fundamentalist backgrounds.
Mhm.
So I think that purity culture is definitely rooted in there somewhere, even if it's not explicit. It's definitely in the background of the religious teachings that are being forced upon children.
Yeah, and we need to be really aware of what our children are consuming and the stories that are being fed to them. I even just think of all the Disney happily ever after type of cartoons. And what does she need? She needs to get married off. She needs a prince to come along and save her and whisk her off her feet and all those sorts of things. Those are in no way preparing children for real adulthood and the demands and rigors of daily life. Or it's not telling them that, yeah, you're fine on your own. You might choose actually not to have a partner, and that's okay too. So being aware and trying to balance the messages that our children are getting.
Yeah. Shifting gears a little bit here. I guess going back to the coming out of religion and all that. How can somebody cope with the loss that they might feel of like purpose and community that often accompanies leaving a faith tradition?
Yeah, that can be such a huge one. I'm thinking for me also, that was very big. So in the Pentecostal church that I was a part of, um, over top of the doors inside when you were leaving to go outside, it said, "You are now entering the mission field," just to remind us all the time that there was nothing greater for us to be focusing on than trying to win souls. Our job was to know God and make him known to other people. And that was the purpose that was kind of drilled into my head and instilled in me from the time I was born. Um, so then to get to a point where my entire belief in God disappeared altogether. And I began seeing the Bible as something very different from the history book that I thought it was, the accurate, reliable, truthful, timeless word of God. And so it was just such a huge loss. Even the way that I understood the world, we've got these pegs that we hang things on to help them make sense. They were all gone. It all just dissolved and it felt like there was nothing made sense. Everything was topsy-turvy. Um, so that one was a hard one to cope with. I started looking into humanism and secular humanism and trying to educate myself about that. And then also doing values clarification. A colleague of mine, David Teachout, he has a website called Life Weavings, lifeweavings.com. And David has some excellent resources on there about values clarification. And that's an important step in our journey because our parents and our pastors and priests, they told us how we had to be. These are your values. But we're not bound by those anymore. We're adults. We're able to think freely. So obedience would have been at the top of my values list before. Doesn't even make my list now. Autonomy is right up there. It's number one. It's my number one value. So people can spend some time doing values clarification, and that also can help them as they're seeing what they might want to do, where they might want to spend their energy and resources. Do they love animals? Okay, it's time to look at volunteering at an animal shelter or things like that. You want what you do to be in line with your values. That's when you start feeling satisfaction. And I tell people there is no divine orchestrated purpose for each individual. The meaning of life is to give life meaning. You get to decide what's important to you, and that can be a beautiful part of your journey. But you're also grieving the loss of the purpose that you had, like the direction you thought your life was going. It's not the same anymore. So that requires a little bit of time and acknowledgement as well.
Well, so I get into this conversation a lot with religious people, and I primarily make response videos. So I respond to videos and I try to give good advice to people that would care to watch. And typically, when the topic of purpose comes up, I will sort of, I guess, restate it because I feel like religious people like to state things in certain ways, but if you really think about it and then restate it just in a different way, it makes it a lot clearer what they're talking about. And for the purpose aspect of this, I've always characterized it, and maybe you disagree with me, but I've always characterized it as them saying, "Well, you don't have my purpose, and so that means that you don't have purpose." Like basically this
Mm.
idea that only a religious purpose, being that you're put here to please God or to do things for God, and having God at the forefront of your mind with everything that you do, that is the only purpose for people. And when I kind of restate like what the purpose is that they're talking about, I find that it's incredibly, for me at least, it's incredibly sad to think about a life like that. And I'm kind of curious what you think about people that are like, well, you don't have any purpose, or atheism, or secular humanism means that there's no purpose to life or anything like
Yeah.
that, just taking a very nihilistic approach to it.
Hmm. Um, I like to share just a word picture with my clients, um, that we're going to picture a buffet table that stretches out as far as we can see, and there are thousands and thousands of dishes on that buffet table, all different kinds of experiences. That's what's represented. And religion would have us starve to death at that buffet table of life experience. You get the same thing to pick at over and over again. And that's just not how life is. I consider that I'm here gathering experiences, just collecting experiences. I go. Some of them I love and I want to repeat. I'll go back for seconds and thirds. And some of the dishes I'll take a bite and I'm like, nope, that's not for me. I'm going to keep on going. But I'm not going to starve to death by saying I only get this one thing forever and ever. So I think you're absolutely right. It's very sad for people to be that limited, because what's limited is our time. I mean, if we get 85 years, 90 years, well, that's considered a good long life. Are you going to just waste it all on this one little thing? No, there's so much to experience out there and to enjoy. And really, we just have to be mindful of the laws of the land. We don't want to be breaking the law, don't want to be hurting other people if we can help it. Otherwise, that's a pretty broad space that I can go and play in and have lots of fun and do what's meaningful for me. I like teaching people. I like interacting with people. That's where I get my meaning. That's why I set up the conference and the YouTube channel and all those things. That's what's meaningful for me. So that's what I do.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of things that bring meaning to my life too. And, none of it concerns like any kind of transcendent purpose. It's all very, or I guess, for the lack of a better word, maybe, earthbound, like very, very much in the present and everything. But, I had a really good question to ask. And then
It'll
I
come
started
back.
talking. Yeah,
It'll
it
come
it
back.
it will. Um, it as far as this, like, having I just got it back. Um, as far as having this very God-centered purpose, in your life and everything, do you think that that leaves you open to being manipulated by people? Because I feel like as long as somebody can show how this particular action glorifies God, then it seems to make it okay to do, regardless of the actual moral implications of whatever action they're talking about.
You're hitting all the points. I love it. Yes, it's so it's we have to apply the willing suspension of disbelief. If we're going to embrace religion, if we're going to accept miracles and all these claims, even no matter how much we might apply critical thinking in the rest of our lives, we can't apply it to those things, because that's where faith comes in. And the minute that we suspend that critical thinking or that disbelief, anything else, anyone, a charlatan, a mentally ill person, they can all come in and say, God told me so. Thus saith the Lord, you must obey me. And that's, again, how predators get in and rise to the top, because they say, well, God told me this, so I'm a prophet. And people are like, okay, he's a prophet or she's a prophet. And that's just where you open yourself up to so much trouble.
Yeah, I obviously I totally agree with that. Now, can you explain some effective ways to find some new sources of meaning and community after moving away from religious beliefs?
Yeah, I think starting off with the values clarification is what's really going to help set us on our way. Um, and then also, one part of the grieving process, when we know uh, that we're healing, our life is starting to move forward again, we want to give meaning to our loss. And so, one way I've done this is by starting my podcast and by starting my conference. So, I've been through my own religious trauma. So, now I work with others who are looking to um, heal their own religious trauma or keep going with their life after religion. So that's me uh, giving back into the community and making meaning of my loss. So some people might want to ramp up their giving to Planned Parenthood or other groups, Freedom from Religion Foundation. I just love those folks, or to the Godless Engineer. To keep your show going. So we need to do some values clarification, and then sometimes put our money where our mouth is. I used to really speak out against abortion. I thought abortion was the worst thing ever. That's why I think it's important for me now, maybe to walk people in, past protesters at my local hospital, to kind of shield them and help them as they are going in to have a procedure done that's taken a lot of thought on their part. I don't want them to be harmed emotionally or mentally or any other way by people who are telling them they don't have the right to do what they want with their own body.
Yeah, now that you mentioned that, there was actually a pretty big protest here in Huntsville, and I've actually got a live stream on my channel here where I had my phone and I took it up there, and these protesters were like yelling obscenities and like yelling at the volunteers for this women's clinic. And so I inserted myself between the volunteers and the protesters, and I just like distracted them and everything because, like I saw it happening on YouTube and I'm like, wait, that's like right down the road. So I just hopped in my car, and I was always the kind of kid that didn't want to rock the boat, like didn't want to get into confrontation and all this other stuff. And so I just like you, I felt like I should, sort of put my money where my mouth is
That's so
and really
awesome.
try to step up. And so that's what I did.
Thank you
Um,
for doing that.
yeah.
That's really cool.
And as far as like creating new like purpose, finding community and everything like that, that's exactly why I started Godless Engineer. Like, not to necessarily give people purpose. I feel like I gave myself purpose in, trying to provide good commentary on common religious things that are said, in the public space and everything. And then, of course, one of the things that's always been a part of like my goal here is to create a community where people can, come and, we can exchange ideas respectfully, and where people can feel supported. And that's actually one of the ways that I met my wife, because I started Godless Engineer, And it was one of those places on the internet she felt like she could come and have good discussions with people, and she just really appreciated the atmosphere that I had created.
Oh,
And it was, that's always been one of the biggest things, you know, one of the biggest things that I've wanted to do with, whatever presence I have on the internet. Which, by the way, I forgot to mention this at the very beginning, but you were one of the first TikTokers that my wife actually followed.
really?
So she's pretty excited about this
Oh, that's
interview.
awesome. Oh, that's great. Yes, I do have a TikTok, and lots of times on there, I'm doing my alter ego, my persona,
Yeah.
which is a bit of fun. So I'm grateful to her for watching that, and I love the idea that you're building community. And I know I've said to people that I feel like with my YouTube channel, because on the YouTube channel, I'm posting my podcast episodes, but also I'm posting former sessions from the conference on religious trauma. And soon I'll be posting the shameless sexuality ones. I feel like if I don't do anything else, this has been enough. This has been me really trying very hard to give back, to offer community, to offer education to people about religious trauma so they know they're not alone. There are other people who have been through this, and there is a way out. It's not the end of the world, because it can feel really hopeless at times. I remember when I first came to the realization, and I texted my big brother. And I think I got out of bed to text him. I was so upset. And I said, I just realized if there's no hell, that maybe there's no heaven. And I was distraught by that thought. And in big brother fashion, he did his best to comfort me. He's an atheist also, and he told me, go look up this video called Optimistic Nihilism on Kurzgesagt channel. And I did. And I watched that video so many times, and I have recommended it to people so many times, because it really helped me as I was coming to terms with the fact that this is the life that I have. And so what kind of legacy do I want to leave? I can, with my good actions, it's like tossing a pebble into a pond. It's going to ripple. Even after I'm gone, it'll be rippling. And hopefully people will be learning something.
Yeah, I hope for that too. Both with my Facebook page that I have, and with the YouTube stuff. I get comments on old videos all the time. Although, my old videos weren't the greatest things ever out there, but you could definitely see like my progress that I've made, because I've been through therapy myself, just dealing with past trauma that I have lived through. So you can definitely tell, like, through my videos, like, kind of how that kind of transformed me, I guess, as far as like my demeanor and everything like that.
Very
Um,
cool.
yeah. I definitely want to suggest, before we get to this last question that I have, and then I did start a few chats. We didn't get any super chats. Well, we got one super chat. We just now got a super chat. But I do have a few starred. But I do want to implore everybody to go over and check out the conference on religious trauma. I've got the YouTube channel linked down below, so you can either click on the name or click on the actual link to the channel. You can go and subscribe there, because it sounds like Janice here has a whole lot of great content that's coming up. If this particular topic, you're really invested in this particular topic. Anyways, to get to my last question here, it's about raising secular children. I have a 13-year-old child, and so that's an interesting
Lucky
experience to
13.
have. Yeah. But my question is what are the core values and teachings that can guide parents in raising morally grounded children outside of a religious framework?
This is such a great question. And before I did the Divorcing Religion podcast, I did one with my dear friend, the Godless Mom, and it was called The Godless Moms because my friend Courtney grew up in a largely atheist agnostic home, and I grew up in a very religious home. And so we would come together on the Godless Moms podcast, and we would discuss some of these issues around parenting and raising kids outside of religion. And religious people love to kind of insinuate or even say outright that you can't have morals without religion. And I think, oh my God, the Bible is the worst place to look if you're trying to instill morals in someone. There's so much violence and sexual violence and everything in there. So really, I point people more towards humanism, secular humanism. I want people to think about, well, what are their values? We're going to go through and do that values clarification. Typically, honesty, compassion, those rank really high for a lot of parents. And so then we're going to look for books, secular books, even fables, Aesop's fables, stories from other cultures, myths from other cultures that are exploring the same things we're talking about. And also, that way, say if we're going through myths of creation from all sorts of other cultures, people have come up with all kinds of stories. And that way we can tell our kids, everyone loves stories, and Christianity is just another story. Christianity is grandma and grandpa's favorite story. That doesn't mean it's the only story. That doesn't mean it's the right story. But really, we want our kids to be honest, to act with integrity. So we also need to model that for them, which includes sometimes it's tiring being a parent. When we've had a bad day, we might be sharp with our kids. We might yell, and yelling at our kids is not great. And so then we need to own up and say, I'm sorry that I yelled at you. I shouldn't have yelled at you. And just to try and restore any breach that's occurred in that relationship. And also letting our kids know they can bring anything to us, any question, doesn't matter, even if we go beet red, even if they're like, well, how old were you when you had sex, or did you ever do this or that? Sometimes we mightn't be able to answer them in the moment. We might have to say, I just need a few minutes to think about that, or let me think about how I can best answer that tomorrow, and then follow through and talk with them so they know they can just tell you anything. And they're not going to be shushed or pushed away. They're not going to be shamed because they have a question or a problem. I think that's one of the best things we can do as parents. Just let our kids know they can ask us anything. If we don't know the answer, we're going to help them find the answer. We're going to look together for the answer.
Yeah, I gotta say that's great advice. I know growing up, I had issues with, I guess telling people news that they didn't want to hear because of how like my parents and other people would have responded to me, or they did respond to me, and so it really made me cautious about that. That's something personally that I still deal with today. Um, how do you how do you feel about religious people that claim that the only way to really teach morality or have a good moral foundation is to believe in God? Like even if you yourself, and there's an actual video on PragerU. I
Oh,
don't know if you're
gosh.
familiar with
Yes, I
yeah.
am. Unfortunately so.
Yeah, there's a video on PragerU where the person is like, even if you're an atheist, you should still like indoctrinate your children into religion because it will make them better people. Like it gives them a firm foundation. I'm
Wow.
wondering what you think about that idea.
Yeah, well, I think it's total BS. And I think, if anything, indoctrinating children to believe in a book or magical thinking, or that they have to forgive other people, we're indoctrinating them to make them more putty in the hands of a predator. That's not what we want. We want to raise our kids, we want to give them the gift of thinking critically, evaluating truth claims, while also being compassionate. Those two need to go together, and that could be quite a balancing act. But in no way do I think people need religion in order to be moral. And in fact, when I'm working with my clients, I prefer to speak in terms of ethics rather than morality, because morality has been completely and utterly hijacked by religion. But ethics, no, you don't need religion to be an ethical person, to act with integrity.
I totally agree with you. I do foresee religious people saying that, like, for instance, if they're a Christian, well, Christian ethics is the only real kind of ethics that is ethical and everything. And I mean, I'm not saying this so that you can respond. You can respond if you want to. I just that's just how my mind works, is thinking
Mhm,
about the possible comebacks that you might receive for that. But
mhm.
I feel that, like, a lot of religions out there kind of skew either morality or ethics, because if you look at the ethics of, any one of the big three, you have so many ethical problems that are caked into the teachings of it.
Yeah.
And I think that teaching that to children is pretty bad. um
And thinking also, and maybe encouraging our kids whenever they're having conversations, or if they know they might have a difficult conversation coming up with a friend, um, encouraging people to begin with the end in mind. What is it that you hope to get out of this conversation? Um, and then thinking of what are the possible reactions that the other person might have. What's the best way that we could present our case to them? And often, so I'm thinking of uh, an issue you mentioned with your parents, and it's hard for you sometimes to give people bad news. There's never a good time to give bad news, but there are ways that we can deliver the news that might help mitigate some of the either some of the pain or some of the reactionary ways that it might be received. So, and people can even just Google that, how to give bad news or how to have difficult conversations. It's a good skill to equip ourselves with.
yeah. And then right before we get to the super chats, we do have a few super chats to address. But concerning children and religious indoctrination and everything like that, there's a popular idea in the atheist community that, like, indoctrinating kids into young Earth creationism is abusive to the child, and I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on that statement.
Yeah, I agree. Um, at the very least, it's being neglectful and negligent about actually teaching science, but also introducing kids. This drives me crazy. If you go into a doctor or dentist's office or someplace where there's going to be little kids and they've got like Noah's Ark characters and stuff like that on the wall, and so we're indoctrinating children from the time they're little, really kind of whitewashing that whole story, just talking about the animals going two by two on the ark and God made a rainbow. But actually, it's a story about a despicable, capricious God who killed everything, all the people, all the animals, except one family. That is not a great story, I think, to be teaching children. I think that instills a lot of fear in them. And of course, certainly any teachings related to hell, any teachings related to you're not good enough, you're so terrible at 5 years old that an innocent man had to be murdered, tortured and murdered for you. And actually that was him showing his love. It just twists everything. I don't want people thinking that love is letting yourself get slaughtered and murdered. That's not love. Oh dear. I'm still here, but I'm not sure what happened to the Godless Engineer, who's the host of our show. Let me see if I can read any of the comments. Let's see. thanks everyone for tuning in, by the way. This is really exciting that so many people are here for this. I see a lot of comments where people say they really don't like the idea of people using God to punish others. Ethics and moral is in the eye of the beholder. Yeah, that's a good question and a good point. I think people would do well to study ethics, the concept of ethics. And I see someone says, I hope my kids have forgiven me for the time spent in church. Yeah, I say the same. I had to do a lot of apologizing to my daughters, to my grown daughters now. They're in their 20s. And I really went crazy when I left religion. Like I tried everything. I denied myself nothing. It was a lot of fun, but it wasn't the best way to parent. I'll tell you that. So had to have some really frank conversations with my kids about that. Oh, Caitlin.
Oh.
You're so sweet. Hi.
I'm so sorry.
I don't know what happened.
No.
I don't know if you can still see me and hear me or not.
No, yeah. Sorry, my internet went down. Like it shut off and then it came right back. I don't know
It's
what
the
happened.
devil.
I know. God heard us having this conversation, was like, you know what? Fuck godless engineer.
That's hysterical. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I hope I did okay.
Yeah, I'm sure you did fine. You're great. Okay. So like I said, we do have we do have some super chats to get to. I think although all of the chats that I had selected initially I had starred got unstarred. So hold on, let me rebuild this list a little bit here.
I'm just getting something special here for Caitlin because she made a lovely comment. She said, I adore you. Thank you for coming onto the show. I couldn't believe it when John told me. It was like, oh my God, it's Gloria. And she's talking about this lady, my alter ego. Yes, here I am. It's me, Gloria, your favorite Auntie Glow. Going to talk to you a little bit today about religious trauma. And when I approach people that way, I think it makes things go down a little bit easier sometimes. There you go,
Caitlin. Okay. I actually, I know she has watched a lot of you, but I actually hadn't seen you yet on TikTok. So I've got some binging to do later on.
Okay.
But so we do have 3 super chats to discuss. Before we hit those super chats, do you want to kind of shill yourself a little bit? I know that you've talked about court and everything like that, but just let everybody know, all the projects that you're working.
Sure. Yes. So I work with clients one-on-one as a religious recovery consultant. In Canada, I'm a registered professional counselor as well. And my website is divorcing-religion.com. So you can go there and see a bit of my story, see me in my head covering back in my Mennonite days and find out a little bit about me there. And then, of course, the Conference on Religious Trauma, or CORT, C-O-R-T, is just a labor of love that I do every year. And I really want more and more people to find out about it because it's such fantastic resources. People talking all about religious trauma recovery and different aspects of it. And they're typically psychologists and social workers, very smart people who are experienced with religious trauma recovery. And then right now I'm working on the Recovery Center project as well. And I think in the new year, I might be taking my Divorcing Religion podcast and making it into a live show like this, where people can interact throughout the show. So that's something for people to keep watching for.
Awesome. That sounds great. So our first super chat here tonight is from Paleoism, who says, "Don't discount hedonism. It's really okay just to do things for yourself and the pleasure you get from it." Well,
Amen.
what are you? Amen. I was going to ask, what do you think about hedonism or hedonistic lifestyle?
Well, I am a huge fan of pleasure. Pleasure with myself, pleasure with other people, whatever pleasure looks like and feels like for people. I think the world will be a better place. And of course, again, we're obeying the laws of the land, being mindful that we want to do our best not to hurt other people. But I can think of a lot worse things than living a life giving yourself pleasure. Why not?
Yeah, a lot of religious people frame, thinking about yourself, doing things for your own pleasure because you like them. They always portray that as something that's very negative,
Oh,
like as if you're
selfish,
doing something
selfish.
wrong. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's why I even say do it with gusto. Oh my god. Forbidden fruit makes the tastiest jam, my friend. Have fun.
Yeah. All right, and then I believe that's the comment that you were reading a second ago.
Yes. Thank you,
Oh my
sweetheart.
God, it's Gloria. Yeah, and then she says, "Love you too, Bay. I'm just the afterthought here.
You're
Like
so
I'm."
lucky.
And then we just had a $30 super chat from MP. Thank you so much there, MP,
Hmm.
for helping support us. This month we're donating toys and Christmas gifts to Kids to Love. It's a foster care organization here in North Alabama. And
Beautiful.
so yeah, we this is our 5th year doing it. The first year we collected a lot of money, we went out, we bought a whole bunch of toys, and then the next year we're like, well, what do you need? And so that's what we've been doing since, is we contact the organization, find out what they need, and then we go and we buy whatever presents they're most in need for. Sometimes it's like shoes and clothes, and then for the older foster kids it's like gift cards and stuff. So
Yeah, what a
um
beautiful idea. And that actually has to do with what we are talking about, um, making meaning and giving back. And when we've been talking about community, it makes me think of volunteering. Volunteering is an excellent way for people to be building their new communities and giving back to the communities. I love it that you guys are doing that. That's awesome.
yeah. And the first charity thing that we did, we actually raised like a lot of money. I can't remember how much, but we bought like 800 pounds of peanut butter because they were doing a peanut butter drive to send to Haitian orphans. And so,
Amazing.
yeah, we ended up having to borrow a car, and we filled up the entire back end. Like it sat low, like that. It's 800 pounds of peanut
Oh
butter,
my
like in the
gosh.
back. So it was a lot.
That is very fun. Yeah, and I think actually, especially for those of us who spent time doing missions trips and missions work and doing everything in the name of God and Jesus and all that stuff, it can be important for us to get involved in more humanitarian things like you're just talking about there with the peanut butter.
Yeah. I always try to focus on, doing good things for people around me, for my community, for, wherever I'm living at the time. I try to put a big focus on that. And I try to impart that, to my son. It's a little difficult because he's 13 years old, but we try to do our best.
Mhm. Yeah, and he's watching, even if he doesn't seem like he is, he's still taking it all in.
Oh yeah, trust me. I definitely know that. My wife KC, she's like, you don't even have to question whether or not he's your son. He's your son. And so like I
100%.
definitely, yeah, exactly. Um, we did have a couple of super chats, which I found, and I can only read because I can't go back that far
Okay.
in our chat here.
Mhm.
But it's Kelly Meadows in the chat said, "I came from a fundamentalist background. I saved myself. I am a savior." And
Oh, I love
so
that. That's so
yeah.
beautiful and so true.
Uh, And then I can't remember. I think it was he had commented, or they had commented at the beginning of the chat. Mr. Mortal Raw, and I guess this is a little bit of a pat on the back for me to read it like live on air, but he said, "Godless engineer, thank you for helping me get past the fear of hell and the unforgivable sin. I greatly appreciate it, and you'll never know how much you've helped me. Thank you. I'm an ex-Christian."
Oh, that's wonderful. That's so cool. Well done.
Yeah. And I'm kind of curious, what are your thoughts about the doctrine of hell? Because there's a lot of people that consider it very abusive to teach that to either children or young adults, and then there's other people that it didn't have too much an effect on, I guess. So
Yeah.
what's your opinion about it?
I think it is abusive to threaten a child with any kind of separation, whether it's separation from their parents, because their parents are God to them. When they're little, they don't really have a concept of God. They just know their parent is all powerful. So even threatening eternal separation from a child is abusive. It just puts them into a state of terror. And then when you add in the idea of, oh, by the way, there'll also be eternal torture or burning or whatever, that's just not something that children need to be thinking about. And if the only way that you can get someone to accept your religious beliefs is by threatening them, I mean, that sounds like an abusive boyfriend. You either love me or I'll kill you. It doesn't sound like the promise of a loving God. And I encourage people to start researching as well the origins of hell. When did the idea of hell even start popping up in literature or whatever, and how it's changed through the years? For a lot of people, this life is hell. If you're watching your child starve to death or whatever's going on, it's hell on earth in that sense. We don't need imaginary pretend hell.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then Trickster had a question. He asked, "Does baptism mean anything if you had no choice in the matter?"
Yeah. Ooh, I like this. I like this because this is another hobby horse. So I get so irritated when I see women posting on Instagram or wherever, so and so, my little 4-year-old just accepted the Lord Jesus into their heart. Well, that kids don't have the ability to think critically, and so parents are telling them this very important, very scary, terrifying truth: you got to believe or else you're going to go to hell. So we soak it up, we take it in because we have to believe our parents because they're responsible for us, and we put all kinds of psychological booby traps around that belief because we don't want to touch it. And that happens when we're children, or maybe there's pressure in youth group. Maybe it's Jesus camp or some camp like that, and it's all the peer pressure, and the youth pastor knows how to lay the pressure on. We wouldn't accept a signature of a child or teenager on any kind of contract as being valid. So insisting or encouraging, coercing them to make an oath or a pledge or a covenant or a lifelong vow is despicable. It's just, it's unacceptable. And baptism falls in with that too. Kids get baptized because they've been coerced to do so. They don't have the ability to think critically about whether it actually means anything.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you were able to join me tonight there, Janice. It's been great talking to you, and I can't wait to have you on again because this has been a really great conversation. I love talking about this topic, and part of my channel here it actually tries to address a lot of the stuff that you cover. So I really appreciate you coming on and everything like that. And just to let everybody know, I am going to be on Janice's channel, the Court channel, Conference on Religious Trauma, where she'll be interviewing me here soon. We haven't hashed out the specifics, but I will be doing an interview for Janice here soon. So make sure you subscribe to her channel that's in the description right now, and you'll be able to see that interview too. I'll be sure to share it on my community tab for all of y'all as well, so that you know when it comes out. But you should definitely subscribe because, like I said, all the stuff that you get coming out on your channel, it sounds amazing, and I can't wait to get caught up on what you already have there.
Thank you so much. It's been a real joy. It's just been way more fun than I even thought it would be, chatting with you here, because trauma can be a heavy topic sometimes. And if I have one thought to leave folks with, it's that little saying that I gave you a few minutes ago: forbidden fruit makes the tastiest jam. Don't be afraid to try out pleasure, people. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been a great time.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. And, I hope that people will be compelled to go over there and subscribe, because like I said, you got something great going on over there. I will see all you heathens tomorrow night. We have a live stream, so be sure to tune in then. And I guess we will see you heathens later. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.